If the Cubs were to win this series, now forget that. If the Cubs were to win the World Series, paint the picture of what the city of Chicago would be going through.
Well, I think if you can think back to the 3 different parades that the Blackhawks had in the last 5 years, you realize that they can pack a whole lot of people downtown to watch a very exciting parade from a city that's not exactly known as the city of champions outside of the Jordan era of basketball and this new era of the Blackhawks. As far as the Bears are concerned, as far as the Cubs and the White Sox are concerned, there's that one World Series that the White Sox had in 2005. I do believe that if the Cubs win the World Series, people are going to be flying in from all over the country to attend what should be about a week celebration. And it's probably something that the city of Chicago has never seen before. I think it'll be one of the great events in the city. And, you know, all they have to do is win, I believe they have to win 9 more games. Now, that's easier said than done, but right now the young players are doing pretty well.
Speaking of that, I mean, they brought up two guys that really have had impact on that team, and you've been able to look at it very objectively in what's going on this year. I made a point to Les one day, and on Around the Horn, Steve, that I thought Joe Maddon meant as much as 10 to 15 games for the Cubs. Would you agree or disagree with that statement that Maddon could be considered the most valuable person, if not most valuable Cub this year, because of the impact he had on managing that team?
Well, understand, I think that Joe Maddon is great, and I said when they hired him that the people of Chicago don't know what a wonderful manager Joe Maddon is. That being said, I don't believe that any manager means 10 to 15 games to a team, but I will tell you something, that Joe was the perfect man for a young team just coming together. And the one thing you have to understand about the Cubs, and that is everybody is looking at this as a dynasty. Sometimes a funny thing happens on the way to a dynasty. This was the kind of year where the Cubs had everything that had to go right absolutely went right. Now, they brought up Chris Bryant. They brought him up a little earlier than they would have liked because of the injury to Olt. And Bryant went on to drive in 99 runs. Got probably hands down Rookie of the Year. Will it happen next year? I don't know. Some guys have a tendency on the way to the coronation to get hurt. Schwarber came up, hit the ball out of the park consistently, is still doing that. And although they thought he was good, they probably didn't realize he would be this good this soon. Addison Russell came up, took the spot of Starlin Castro at shortstop, and when that happened, the Cubs got a whole lot better. You take a 10-win pitcher in Jake Arrieta, who now wins 22 during the regular season and has won in the postseason. So, I mean, you're looking at a team that literally had everything go right. I take you back to, long ago for most people. It seemed like yesterday for me and probably for you, Woody. I know Les is quite a bit younger than us. But
Thanks, Steve.
1984, the Cubs almost got there. They needed one more win against San Diego with 3 games to go, and they lost them all. Everybody thought bringing back essentially the same team in 1985, that team was going to not only win the division, win the league, win the World Series, but it was going to do it in handily fashion. Well, it didn't work out that way because at that point we lost our entire pitching staff in a 2-week period. 85 turned out to be a disaster, and I'd say a funny thing happened on the way to the coronation. What this team does have going for it is that these guys are very young. Rizzo's 26 years old. He's one of the stars of this team. He's going to finish in the top probably 2 or 3 for MVP voting. And, you know, he's at 26, he becomes one of the de facto leaders of this team. Yes, Montero is certainly a little bit older, but not old by any stretch of the imagination. And what they really need is some help out of that bullpen. And what Theo is going to do, and again, if you're looking for most valuable guys around, Theo Epstein and Jed Hoyer both have done a great job not only in their trading, but in their bringing along a lot of these people and being smart enough, obviously, to mention that if anything ever happened to Joe Maddon where he would want to exit out of his contract, well, there's a nice home for him in Chicago. It was a great move, and Joe's done a great job.
Steve, do you believe that the Cubs do have what it takes this year to go all the way? And I'm talking primarily about the starting rotation and experience, because it's such a young team.
Well, they don't have experience, but sometimes experience will only take you so far. I mean, eventually you have to win. I'm thinking 1908 was a long time ago. Sometimes that ball has to drop in that particular slot that allows you to go all the way. This happens to be a very good Cub team. Now, granted, if you take a look at the work out of the bullpen, it hasn't been as consistent as they would like. If you take a look at the starting rotation, yes, Arrieta is very good. John Lester is very good. After that, it's flip a coin. I mean, Hendricks has shown on occasion he can throw well, but they're throwing Hamill in the game tonight, and he's had a second half that has been a little shaky. So I think this team absolutely does have a chance to win. Now, last night they got all the best of it, and I'll tell you exactly why. The wind was blowing out, gusting up to 25, 28 miles an hour, and the ball was flying out of the ballpark, and the Cubs have more power than the Cardinals. That's just kind of the way it goes, especially in that small ballpark. When Joe Maddon said most of those balls that were hit would have gone out in other places, he was not accurate. Most of the balls that were hit found the first or second row on a night when the wind was blowing straight out and the Cubs hit 6 home runs. That being said, tonight, ostensibly, the wind is going to blow in. It's coming out of the northwest. If the wind blows in, it's going to be a little more difficult for those right-hand hitters and the left-handers who hit the ball to the left side for those guys to hit the ball out of the park. So I think if John Lackey has anything close to what he had in the first game, and that, coming back on short or rest, that remains to be seen. But this Cub team can hit, and Joe Maddon can manage. And the idea that Joe would use a couple of, and they weren't suicide squeezes. It looked to me like they were both safety squeezes, but he used them back-to-back, essentially to take that second game away from the Cardinals. That was the biggest win he could have possibly had, because then, knowing that Arrieta has been close to automatic, now you go up 2-1 because you figure to win Arrieta's games. You didn't figure that he was going to give up, all the runs that he gave up, but the offense came to the front. Yes, they can win. Yes, they are inexperienced, and yes, they are very young, but they're also really talented.
Steve Sohn, in our opinion, one of the greatest baseball broadcasters of all time, and I don't say that because you're here. Les said it the other day, and I totally agree with him. There's so few people. Let me step out of bounds for a second, Steve. What's happened?
Okay.
What's happened to broadcasters? They've become so vanilla. They've become so homerish. There aren't. You and Harry were such a team for such years. Jack Buck, Joe Garagiola, guys who were local broadcasters throughout the history of the game. Vin Scully is gone. I mean, when I say gone, there are no more Vin Scullys. What became of it? Was the teams just decided they were just going to put muzzles on everybody and just say, we want just people that sound exactly alike? Or has it just the world of broadcasting hasn't brought along the type of people that you have been in your history?
Well, I think, Woody, you bring up a good point, and I think you're right there knocking at the door of the answer. First of all, those legendary older broadcasters, they all started out on radio. And you've got to really learn how to call a game on radio because you're painting a picture for people who can't see it. Television is a completely different animal. What's happened is not necessarily what's happened to broadcasters, Woody. It's the fact that most teams, most bosses of the various broadcasters, the people that hire them and the people that evaluate them, they pretty much say, look, especially if they're employees of the team, look, there's certain things that we don't want to say. There's certain things we have to stay away from. It's not overt censorship, but I think everybody who works for a local team has a pretty good idea about where he can go and where he can't go. Now, the day and age of Harry Carey is gone. No one will ever be the type of salesman of the game or of the city of Chicago or of the Cubs that Harry Carey was. Vin Scully was the guy. When God invented broadcasters, they took Vin Scully and said, this is what everybody should aspire to because he's probably the greatest that ever lived. But as great as Vin Scully was, he wasn't as great a salesman as Harry Carey, who could sell anything. And so, but that type of guy, Jack Buck, you mentioned, that there's a lot of them that had a really colorful style that it's almost being legislated out of the game. They don't want those kind of guys because they realize that the advertising arm of most of these teams comes out of the television. The big bucks come out of the television. They want their broadcasters to sell the product. So, yes, you can be critical, but critical with an eye to what exactly it is you're selling. And usually if you're a local broadcaster, you're selling that team you're working for.